Welcome to Jared Scott Outdoors, your source in the field for local outdoor news. This week on Jared Scott Outdoors, we're back out archery elk hunting. Last week you saw as we had a few close calls and saw lots of animals, but for the most part just had elk that we couldn't get in on. In fact, we ended the show with Nathan and I watching several elk, but between rock slides and too many eyes, we just couldn't get in on the bulls before running out of daylight. Well, we backed out at dark and camped at the bottom of the canyon so we could come in underneath this time with the wind in our favor and avoid that giant rock slide.
We can hear them up ahead of us. They're bugling, so they're still here. I've seen a couple elk, but maybe half mile away, still pretty high. But it's such open country, we're gonna have to just kind of sneak in and be really careful and try to get in there again. But there's a nice bugle there, so they're out there. See what we can do.
As we continued to close the gap, we noticed and heard another group of elk off to our left in the wide open sagebrush. From all the bugles we could hear directly in front of us, we knew this wasn't the main group. But we could tell there was at least one bull with those cows, and later watched another bull cross over in front of us that walked all the way over to that group to see if he was big enough to push out the other bull. As we kept on going, it didn't take long to see some of the elk out in front of us, but we had a problem. It was wide open between us and them. This wasn't any better than the night before. While it wasn't the big rock slide like the night before, it was wide open sagebrush between us. Granted, we did have this patch of timber on our right, but we found that inside it was a jungle of downfalls that made it impossible to walk through without sounding like a herd of elephants breaking through the trees. We were stuck. Well, what could we do? The only thing I could think of was to try to stay on the edge of the trees and slowly sneak up whenever the elk weren't looking. We actually spent a couple hours inching our way closer and closer. There were so many elk that kept crossing back and forth over the ridge in front of us that it was really slowing down our progress. We had the same two bigger bulls we'd seen the evening before with some smaller ones. They were bugling pretty non-stop as the bulls kept checking cows out only to leave and check out others, then to return a few minutes later. It was quite fun to watch, but we were in the same bind as the night before. We had elk all over and we couldn't hardly do a thing about it. At one point, the second largest bull walked over the ridge and started our way. With no cows in the immediate area, we thought that now was our chance. I made a few calls and sure enough, it got its attention and started working towards us. It was finally looking like things were going to work out. He was interested and heading in. I quickly told Nathan to knock an arrow and get ready while I got the rangefinder out so I could give him yardage as it closed in. Just as we were gearing up for a possible shot, he started walking more to our left and not directly to us. He was interested, but he wasn't seeing what he was looking for, and that made him hesitant. Still curious, yes, but now he wasn't seeing what he wanted. He just kept walking to the left. He was headed to the other side where several cows were still feeding. It's obvious when these bulls have been hunted a bit and they start getting a little more wary. Then after more time, and with us even closer now, all the elk started feeding across the clearing in front of us into the trees above us. That would at least give us some room to work and move if the wind didn't bust us first. We just bided our time as we watched the elk slowly feed across. Just as the last of the elk were about out of sight, suddenly they all went on attention and elk started running back out and then proceeded to run over the ridge. We didn't know what happened until we started hearing other bugles that were obviously a hunter, followed by cow calls that also sounded like hunters. Sure enough, there was a couple hunters that had come in from our side and busted all the elk. We tried a few more things, but in the end, the elk left the country, and with that, we were left in a canyon with no elk.
Guess that's how it goes on public land. You win some, you lose some.
So a handful of days later, I was back out. This time, however, I was with Jacob Newman. It was he and I that were hunting together last year when we were blessed with 2 elk in 2 days. So of course, we headed to the same spot where we'd had so much luck the year before. Only this time, there were no elk anywhere. It was dead quiet. But judging from the hunting rigs we saw, I think we knew why the elk seemed to be gone. We actually did find some elk, but these elk had obviously had enough hunting pressure that they just decided to play the antelope game. They were up on a high mountain with nothing but sagebrush all around them. There was no way a hunter with bow and arrow was going to sneak in on them. Now the morning wasn't a total loss. We actually had a bit of fun when we spotted this black bear walking the draw below us. It was oblivious to us as it meandered up. We were on the side of the hill with nothing but super noisy brush all around us, so we couldn't really move much without spooking it. We did try to get a little closer just to get some film on the bear, and then suddenly, to our surprise, it started walking up in our direction. This was perfect. Since we couldn't move to him, he'd come to us, and we didn't understand just how close he'd come. Yep, it just kept coming closer and closer. Now the bear was only 5 yards away. As it looked up, it obviously saw us, but didn't know if we were a threat or not. As the bear was as close as Jacob wanted it, he forced a cough, just to make sure the bear knew we were there. That did get its attention, and then it went on high alert. Still not sure what we were, it skirted around us, but still wasn't in too much of a hurry. While I did have a bear tag in my pocket, this really was a young bear, and I felt it better just to let it be. However, it was a kick to see and to have it so close.
That was fun. I'm glad it wasn't a big bear.
Well, we hadn't given up yet, but we did give up on that area. Hiking out and driving to a completely different spot a good hour away, we packed our gear to sleep on the mountain and headed on up what turned out to be a very steep hillside. The problem was we had distant bugles up above us that kept pulling us that way. The sun was getting close to the horizon, so we knew time was running out. Making it to the top, everything went quiet. But then with the sun set and just 20 minutes of light, an elk walked out about 200 yards away on the open side of the ridge. Luckily, we had a couple trees that allowed us to hurry in and cut the distance in half. This 5-point bull wasn't huge, but he was big enough for me. We were now down to 5 minutes of shooting light, and while the elk was feeding our way, it was sure taking its time. That's when I decided to go ahead and let out a few cow calls to try to hurry him closer. Like so often occurs with elk that have been hunted, it got its attention, but he was really wary. When I lost sight of him going behind a tree, I didn't see him come out higher than I thought, and he caught me. It was still out of range, and that was that. Just another close call.
So it's the following morning now. Jacob and I just slept here on the mountain. We had one elk bugle a couple times, 4 and 5 in the morning, so hopefully if we go around the corner we can get into some elk this morning.
Sure enough, just moments after cresting the ridge to look over the other side, Jacob spotted 2 elk, and both of them were bulls. They weren't bugling or anything, just slowly feeding away from us. Ducking out of sight, we used cover to get over into the trees near where they were. We planned on setting up close to where they disappeared and trying to sweet talk them in with a few cow calls. However, just as we got to the spot we wanted to call from, another raghorn bull jumped up and ran off. It had been bedded up just on the other side of a tree we were next to. As we listened to it run down the mountain, we heard a few other elk run off with it as well. And it appeared that in just a matter of minutes, we managed to spook all the elk off the mountain we'd worked so hard to be on at first light. Not wanting to give up yet, we went ahead and slowly hunted the draws and hillside we were on. While we didn't see or hear anything, we did briefly spot a bull and a cow elk on the next ridge over that disappeared into the edge of some timber, and then a mile beyond them, we saw more distant elk. So at least, I guess we had some backup elk if nothing materialized where we were. Even with all the rubs we were seeing, we didn't find any more elk. Guess we'd have to work our way to those other elk we'd seen hours earlier. Well, because I'm running out of time, I'll just say, we found and tried to get in on that next bull, but it didn't work out. We've got another group across the way,
that we also saw this morning, and we kind of been watching them as a backup. So anyways, we just got to figure out how to make a play on it.
We debated over a couple different options and finally made the decision to hike to a point above the elk that would hopefully be upwind. Then, depending on what we saw, we would make a game plan. It was a hard hike just to get there. We had to hike down the canyon and then back up the other side that, while it wasn't straight up, sure seemed that way today. It was steep and our tired legs had just about had it. I'll be the first to admit that really at this point, with so many failed attempts, I didn't hold much hope for this to work out. But we had to try, and that was my drive. We at least had to try. The wind was blowing pretty hard today, but luckily, at least for now, it was consistently uphill, so that was a positive. Getting to a point above where we'd last seen the elk hours before, we peeked over, and to our surprise, they were right where we'd last seen them. They were just feeding and then started bedding down. That was a good sign. That meant they wouldn't be moving anytime soon. However, we couldn't see the bull. We assumed he was down there somewhere, probably feeding or bedded up behind one of those trees that blocked our view. I kind of wanted to hang out and wait for the bull to feed out so we could film him now that we were closer, but we also realized that it was better to make him move quick while the elk were bedded up and before they started moving again. Jacob was kind enough to tell me to go after it while he would film. Taking him up on the offer, I went ahead with the game plan, which was to swing up the mountain further until I could drop down into the draw out of sight. I was amazed at how easy that ended up being, and in just a matter of minutes I was safely down there out of sight with the wind being perfect for me. In fact, while it was really strong up on the ridge, down here in the draw, the wind wasn't nearly as bad. The goal for me was to hike over to a point we had seen that looked like it would overlook the elk and maybe even get me in range. The lay of the land allowed me to walk all the way to that point without them being able to see me, so I could move quickly into position. The only question was, when I got there, would they actually be in range? It's always hard to guess how far things are apart from each other when you're looking at a far distance. I was kind of surprised at how different it looked when I did get down there. I had to actually look up at Jacob a few times as he pointed me in the right direction until I finally found my landmark that I hoped I could get a shot from. Finding this high spot, I slowly crept closer, peeking through the brush. It took a minute, but I saw the first cow bedded up, looking my way. I carefully peeked around and realized that nothing had spotted me yet. But I ranged the elk and they were 90 yards off, too far. I'd have to get closer. However, before I tried to sneak over to my left, I figured I'd better go look on my right first. As I took a few steps over, I couldn't believe it. The bull materialized right below me. He was bedded up, broadside, and in range. I tried to let Jacob know it was below me and that I was going to be trying a shot, and then slowly moved in for the angle. I still had some brush in my way that I needed to get a clear shot through. I contemplated waiting for him to stand up for a bigger target, but decided I better not tempt it. It seems like you usually regret it when you don't take advantage of an opportunity thinking it'll get better. Under the situation, I had a smaller target than when they're standing up, so I mentally prepared myself to make a solid shot, focusing as much as I could on keeping good form. When the bull looked downhill, I took the opportunity and drew back. At the shot, the bull jumped up, but really didn't know what had happened. I immediately saw I'd hit him, however I hit him a bit forward of where I wanted. That being said, he was acting like he was in bad shape. The cows all watched, not knowing what was going on, and the bull just walked up into a couple trees and laid down. It was a few minutes later that he rolled out and expired. He was down. That's when the cows finally realized something was definitely wrong and headed on out, passing right by Jacob.
Oh man! Good job.
Thanks for letting me come to him.
And
so
too much
I
open.
screwed around and it's right straight below me. I mean, it was like the closest spot it could possibly be. There it is. I couldn't believe it. It was just like, what is the luck? And so I had to take a few steps because I had branches above, stuff below. I had to move around, while he was when he was looking away, but. You never knew what happened.
That's
after
awesome.
The shot, he still came out. He didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, after being more than willing to shoot a small bull the previous days, to come out here and tag out on a beautiful 6-point, was amazing.
Oh, wow. I can't believe it. I just can't believe it. All that stuff we've been doing today.
And yesterday.
And yesterday.
Nice.
Beautiful back end on him.
Oh yeah, he's nice.
Wow. Yeah. I was coming today pretty frustrated. A lot of tired hikes, just not a lot of things happening, and we're running out of time. I can't come this weekend, so I was going to be down to just the last couple days of the month. And today I was going to shoot anything with antlers, branched antlers. So to come out with a beautiful bull like this, it's hard to express. So I'm just so thankful and happy about this. We got up there at the top, looked over this. You know, you kind of saw what happened over the course of the day. Just a rough day. We've pounded the miles the last couple days, and Jacob was nice enough to say, Jared, I'm going to stay up here and film while you go shoot that bull. Just sneak on in. And I think he was right. He's like, I don't think you're going to call this one in, just sneak in. And that happened. So thank you very much, Jacob.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
He says he says I'm welcome right now, but when we're done packing this out tomorrow, we'll see. It might be a different tune. But anyways, elk cutting happens like this a lot. You know, just when you're down, something flips and suddenly your day turned awesome. Turned miserable when you're packing out the elk, but we're happy. So I got to get my tag and put this guy on, and we'll start packing it out.
Tune in next week at the same time for another episode of Jared Scott Outdoors.